He looked like a ghost walking among the living. 20 years of complete isolation had carved deep lines into Thaddeus Crane's weathered face, and his hands hadn't felt the warmth of another human being since the day he swore never to touch anyone again. But when he found her tied to that oak tree, bleeding and barely conscious, everything he'd built to protect himself was about to crumble. The morning mist still clung to the pine trees as Thaddeus made his way down the mountain trail, a journey he took only twice a year for supplies. His cabin sat 3 miles up, hidden where no soul would think to look. That's how he wanted it. That's how it had to be. His boots crunched on the frost-covered leaves as he approached the clearing where the old trading post used to stand. But something was wrong. The silence felt different, heavier. Then he saw her. A young woman was bound to the massive oak tree with thick rope, her dark hair matted with blood, her dress torn at the shoulder. Her eyes were closed, but her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. She was alive, but barely. Thaddeus stopped dead in his tracks. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to walk away, to pretend he'd never seen her. For 20 years, he'd avoided exactly this kind of situation. The kind that required him to get close to another person. The kind that demanded he care. But as he stood there, frozen between his past and this moment, the woman's eyes fluttered open. They were green as spring grass, and when they focused on him, they held something he hadn't seen in decades. Hope. She tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear from where he stood. Thaddeus felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. Every step toward her would be a step away from the safety he'd built. Every moment he stayed would bring him closer to the very thing he'd spent 20 years running from. The woman's head dropped forward again, unconscious. Blood seeped from a gash on her temple, staining the rope that held her. Whoever had done this was long gone. But they might come back. And if they found him here, Thaddeus clenched his fists, fighting a war inside himself. He could still leave. He could still save himself. But as he turned to go, he heard something that made his blood run cold. The distant sound of horses approaching, multiple riders, moving fast through the trees. But what he didn't know yet was that helping her would force him to face the very reason he'd been hiding for 20 years. And the men coming through those trees weren't just any bandits. They were the same ones who destroyed his life 2 decades ago. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, maybe 2 minutes away. Thaddeus looked at the unconscious woman, then at the path he could take to escape. 20 years of survival instincts told him to run, but something deeper, something he thought he'd buried forever, made him move toward her instead. His hands shook as he reached for the rope. The moment his fingers touched the coarse fibers, memories flooded back. The last time he'd tried to save someone, the last time he'd cared, the last time everything went wrong because of his choices. The woman stirred as he worked at the knots. Her eyes opened again, clearer this time, and she looked directly at him. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe late 20s, with a determined set to her jaw despite her condition. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "They'll be back. They went to get more rope." More rope. Thaddeus's stomach dropped. These weren't just robbers passing through. They had plans for her, plans that would require her to stay alive for a while. His fingers found the knot and began working it loose. The rope was tight, cutting into her wrists where she'd struggled against it. Every second felt like an hour as the hoofbeats grew closer. He could hear voices now, rough laughter carrying through the morning air. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It felt strange to speak to another person after so long. She nodded, though he could see the effort it took. "I think so. My name is Eleanor. Eleanor Harper." Thaddeus didn't give his name in return. Names created connections, and connections led to caring, and caring led to the kind of pain he'd sworn never to feel again. But as the final knot came loose and she collapsed forward, he instinctively caught her. The contact sent a shock through him. Her weight against his chest, the warmth of her skin, the trust in how she leaned into him. For just a moment, the walls he'd built cracked wide open, and he remembered what it felt like to be human. But the voices were getting closer now. He could make out words. "She better still be there, or Hayes is gonna skin us alive. Where's she gonna go? We tied her good." Thaddeus felt Eleanor tense in his arms. Hayes. Even after 20 years, that name hit him like a physical blow. Clayton Hayes, the man who'd taken everything from him, the man who'd made him into a ghost. Eleanor must have felt his reaction because she pulled back to look at his face. "You know them?" Thaddeus stared into her green eyes, seeing his own fear reflected there. He could tell her the truth. He could explain that Clayton Hayes had destroyed his life once before, had taken the woman he loved and twisted that love into something that ended in blood and screaming, and a guilt so heavy it had driven him into the mountains. But before he could answer, the riders broke through the tree line. 4 men on horseback, led by a figure Thaddeus recognized despite the years that had passed. Clayton Hayes sat tall in his saddle, his dark eyes scanning the clearing until they found the empty rope hanging from the oak tree. Then those eyes found Thaddeus, and a slow, cruel smile spread across Hayes's face. "Well, I'll be damned. Thaddeus Crane. I wondered when you'd crawl out of whatever hole you've been hiding in." The air between them crackled with 20 years of unfinished business. Hayes dismounted slowly, his spurs jangling with each step as he approached. The other 3 men stayed mounted, hands resting on their weapons, forming a loose circle around Thaddeus and Eleanor. 20 years, Crane. 20 years I've wondered what happened to you after that night. Hayes's voice carried the same cold amusement Thaddeus remembered. Heard you went crazy. Heard you killed yourself. But here you are, playing hero again. Thaddeus positioned himself between Hayes and Eleanor, his body rigid with tension. Eleanor gripped his arm and he could feel her trembling, but she didn't cower. There was steel in her, something Hayes hadn't broken yet. "Let her go," Thaddeus said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "Your quarrel is with me." Hayes laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "My quarrel? Boy, you still don't understand what you cost me that night, do you?" He gestured to Eleanor. "This pretty little thing is worth good money to some very particular buyers up north. But you," his eyes glittered with malice, "you're worth something much more valuable. You're worth watching suffer." The memories crashed over Thaddeus like a wave. Sarah's face, her screams, the way Hayes had used his love for her as a weapon, forcing him to choose between saving her and doing what was right, the choice that had destroyed them both. "That was a long time ago," Thaddeus said. "Not long enough." Hayes pulled his gun, but he didn't aim it at Thaddeus. He aimed it at Eleanor. "See? I learned something that night 20 years ago. The best way to hurt a man like you isn't to kill him. It's to make him watch while you destroy everything he cares about." Eleanor straightened, despite the gun pointed at her. "I don't know what happened between you two, but I'm not going to be your pawn." She looked at Thaddeus. "And neither should you." Something in her voice cut through his paralysis. This wasn't Sarah. Eleanor was different, stronger. She wasn't asking him to save her. She was asking him to stand with her. Hayes noticed the change, too. His smile faltered slightly. "Touching. But you see, Crane here has a weakness for damsels in distress. Don't you, Crane? Tell her about Sarah. Tell her how your heroics got the woman you loved killed." The words hit their mark. Thaddeus felt the old guilt rising, threatening to drown him. But Eleanor's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his own. Her touch was warm, real, present, not a memory, not a ghost. "I don't care about the past," she said quietly, her eyes never leaving his. "I care about right now." Hayes raised his gun higher. "How sweet. But right now you're both coming with us. Mount up, Crane, and if you try anything heroic, I'll put a bullet in her pretty head and make you carry the body." Thaddeus looked at the mounted men, calculating distances and odds. 4 armed men against an unarmed hermit and an injured woman. The smart play was to surrender, to look for an opportunity later. But as Hayes gestured toward the horses, Thaddeus caught something in Eleanor's eyes, a slight nod toward the thick brush behind the oak tree. She had a plan, but what she didn't know was that following her lead meant trusting another person completely, something Thaddeus hadn't done in 20 years, and the last time he'd trusted someone, it had ended in blood. Eleanor's plan was simple and desperate. As Hayes motioned them toward the horses, she suddenly stumbled, crying out as if her injured leg had given way. Instinctively, Thaddeus moved to catch her, and in that moment of distraction, she grabbed a handful of dirt and pine needles and hurled it at Hayes's face. The outlaw cursed and stumbled backward, clawing at his eyes. Eleanor grabbed Thaddeus's hand and pulled him toward the dense undergrowth behind the oak tree. For a split second, he hesitated. Running meant committing to this path, to caring about what happened to her. Then Hayes's gun roared, the bullet splintering bark inches from Eleanor's head, and Thaddeus's survival instincts took over. He wrapped his arm around her waist and dove into the brush just as the other 3 men opened fire. Branches tore at their clothes as they crashed through the undergrowth. Behind them, Hayes was shouting orders, his voice raw with fury. "Don't kill them! I want them alive. Spread out. They can't get far." Thaddeus led Eleanor deeper into the forest, following old game trails he'd memorized during his years of solitude. His cabin was 3 miles up the mountain, but getting there meant crossing open ground where Hayes's men could spot them easily. "Can you keep up?" he asked as they paused behind a fallen log. Eleanor's face was pale, and blood from her head wound had dried on her temple, but her eyes were fierce with determination. "I can keep up," she said. "Question is, where are we going? Because if you're thinking of just running until they give up, you don't know men like Hayes. They don't give up." She was right. Hayes had tracked him down after 20 years. The man was nothing if not persistent, and now Thaddeus had given him a new reason to hunt. "There's a place," Thaddeus said. "A cabin. It's hidden, defensible, but getting there is going to be dangerous," Eleanor finished. "Everything's dangerous now, but I'd rather die fighting than let them drag me back." She looked at him intently. What did he mean about Sarah? About getting someone killed? The question hit him like a physical blow. For 20 years he'd avoided talking about Sarah, avoided even thinking her name. But crouched behind this log with bullets whining overhead and Eleanor's green eyes demanding the truth, he found himself speaking. "Sarah was my wife," he said quietly. "Hayes took her, used her as bait to get me to do something I shouldn't have done. I thought I could save her and still do the right thing. I was wrong. What happened to her?" Thaddeus closed his eyes, seeing Sarah's face as clearly as if she were sitting beside him. "She died because I trusted Hayes when he said he'd let her go if I cooperated. I gave him what he wanted and he killed her anyway, just to prove he could." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and touched his arm. "I'm not her," she said simply. "And this isn't 20 years ago. If you're waiting for me to die so you can feel guilty about it, you're going to be disappointed." Despite everything, Thaddeus almost smiled. Eleanor Harper was definitely not Sarah. Sarah had been gentle, trusting, willing to see the good in everyone. Eleanor was sharp-edged steel wrapped in determination. The sound of breaking branches nearby cut short their conversation. Hayes's men were close, spreading out through the forest in a methodical search pattern. Thaddeus could hear them calling to each other, coordinating their movements. "We need to move," he whispered. "Stay close, step where I step, and whatever happens, don't look back." But as they prepared to leave their hiding spot, Eleanor grabbed his arm. "Thaddeus, if we're going to trust each other, I need to tell you something. About why Hayes took me. It's not just about money. If you were Thaddeus, what would you do? Stop to hear the truth that might change everything or keep running before Hayes's men found them? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which choice you'd make." Because what Eleanor revealed next would turn everything Thaddeus thought he knew about this situation completely upside down. Thaddeus froze, his hand still gripping Eleanor's arm. The sound of Hayes's men was getting closer, but something in Eleanor's voice told him this couldn't wait. Whatever she was about to reveal would change everything. "Tell me," he whispered. Eleanor's eyes darted toward the sounds of pursuit, then back to his face. "Hayes didn't just randomly take me. He's been looking for me specifically. My real name isn't Eleanor Harper. It's Eleanor Blackwood." The name hit Thaddeus like a thunderbolt. Blackwood. Judge Marcus Blackwood. The man who'd been trying to bring law and order to the territory 20 years ago. The man Hayes had been running from when he'd taken Sarah. "Judge Blackwood was my father," Eleanor continued urgently. "Hayes killed him 6 months after what happened to your wife. Made it look like an accident. But I knew better. I've been hunting Hayes ever since, gathering evidence, building a case." Thaddeus stared at her, his mind reeling. "You're not a victim. I'm bait," she said grimly. "I let him take me because I needed to get close to his operation. I have evidence hidden that could hang him and his entire network. But I didn't count on you showing up and complicating things." The sound of crashing brush was maybe 50 yards away now. Hayes's voice carried through the trees. "They can't have gone far. Check every hiding spot." Thaddeus felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. Everything he thought he understood about this situation was wrong. Eleanor wasn't some innocent woman who needed saving. She was a hunter, just like Hayes. And he was caught between them. "So what am I to you?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Another piece of bait?" Eleanor's expression softened. "You were supposed to be. Hayes has been obsessed with finding you for 20 years. When I heard the stories about a hermit living in these mountains, I thought maybe, but then I saw your face when you found me tied to that tree. The way you looked at me, that wasn't fake. How do you know? Because I've spent 6 years learning to read people, learning to spot lies and manipulation. And what I saw in your eyes was real." She gripped his hand tighter. But Thaddeus, you need to know. The evidence I gathered about Hayes includes information about what really happened the night Sarah died. The words stopped his heart. What do you mean? Hayes didn't just kill Sarah to hurt you. He killed her because she found out something about his operation. Something that could have destroyed him even back then. You didn't fail her, Thaddeus. She was already dead the moment she discovered his secret. Before Thaddeus could process this revelation fully, a gunshot rang out uncomfortably close. A voice called out, "Found their trail! They went this way!" Thaddeus made a decision that surprised even him. Instead of running, he turned to face the direction of their pursuers. "Where's this evidence?" "Hidden in my saddle pack. But Hayes has it now." "Then we're not running to my cabin," he said. "We're getting your evidence back." Eleanor stared at him. "That's suicide. There are 4 of them." "Maybe. But 20 years ago, I let Hayes take everything from me because I was afraid to fight back. I won't make that mistake again." He looked into her green eyes, seeing Sarah's face for just a moment, then seeing Eleanor clearly. "Besides, you said it yourself. You're not Sarah, and I'm not the same man who let her die." But what neither of them knew was that Hayes had been counting on exactly this reaction. The evidence Eleanor thought was hidden was actually planted information, and Hayes was using both of them to draw out someone much more dangerous than either could imagine. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel. They moved through the forest like shadows, Thaddeus leading Eleanor in a wide circle that would bring them back toward the clearing from an unexpected angle. 20 years of mountain living had taught him patience and silence. Every step was calculated, every broken twig avoided. As they crept closer to where Hayes and his men had made camp, Thaddeus could see the horses tethered near the oak tree where Eleanor had been bound. Her saddle pack hung from one of the animals, tantalizingly close but protected by armed men. Hayes stood in the center of the clearing, studying tracks in the dirt. His 3 companions had spread out in different directions, following false trails. The outlaw leader was older now, his dark hair streaked with gray, but he moved with the same predatory confidence Thaddeus remembered. "They're not far," Hayes called to his men. "Crane's gotten soft in his old age. 20 years ago, I never would have tracked him this easily." Eleanor whispered in Thaddeus's ear, "He's trying to make you angry. Make you do something stupid." She was right. Hayes was baiting him just like he'd done with Sarah. But this time, Thaddeus had the advantage of knowing the game. He studied the layout, counting weapons, measuring distances. Hayes had a rifle across his back and a pistol on his hip. The horses were nervous, shifting restlessly. Something about the setup felt wrong. "Wait here," Thaddeus breathed to Eleanor. "Like hell," she whispered back. "We do this together, or we don't do it at all." Before he could argue, Hayes's voice cut through the forest. "Crane, I know you're out there. Why don't you come out and face me like a man? Or are you going to hide behind another woman's skirts?" The words stung, but Thaddeus forced himself to stay calm. He noticed something that made his blood run cold. Hayes kept glancing toward the tree line on the opposite side of the clearing, as if he was expecting someone. "It's a trap," Thaddeus realized. "He's got more men positioned somewhere else." Eleanor followed his gaze and nodded grimly. "Then we need a different approach." She pulled something from her torn dress. A small Derringer pistol hidden until now. 1 shot. Has to count. "Where did you—" "I told you. I've been planning this for 6 years. I don't go anywhere unprepared." She checked the weapon expertly. "But here's what I need to know, Thaddeus. When the shooting starts, can you kill Hayes? Because if you hesitate, if you let your guilt about Sarah stop you, we're both dead." The question cut to the heart of everything. For 20 years, Thaddeus had avoided violence, avoided confrontation, avoided the very possibility of having to make life-and-death decisions. He'd become a ghost, specifically to avoid moments like this. But looking at Eleanor's determined face, seeing the steel in her eyes, he realized he wasn't the same broken man who'd fled into the mountains. Something had changed the moment he'd chosen to untie her ropes instead of walking away. "I can do what needs to be done," he said. Hayes's voice rang out again. "I've got all day, Crane. But the longer you wait, the more I'm going to enjoy what I do to your new lady friend when I catch her." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "That decides it. I'm going to create a distraction. When I do, you get to those horses and get my saddle pack." "Eleanor, no. It's too dangerous." She looked at him with something that might have been affection. "You know, for a man who hasn't talked to another person in 20 years, you're pretty quick to start caring." Before he could stop her, Eleanor stepped out into the clearing, the Derringer hidden behind her back. "Looking for me, Hayes?" Hayes spun around, his hand moving to his gun. Well, the little rabbit comes out of her hole. Where's your guardian angel? Dead, Eleanor said flatly. You want me? Come and take me. Hayes smiled, but Thaddeus could see the uncertainty in his eyes. This wasn't how he'd expected things to go. You're lying. Crane wouldn't abandon you. He's too much of a hero. Then you don't know him as well as you think you do, Eleanor replied. But as Hayes started walking toward her, Thaddeus saw movement in the trees behind the outlaw. 3 more men emerging from concealment with rifles raised. Eleanor was walking into a crossfire and she didn't see them. The trap was closing, and Thaddeus had seconds to decide. Save Eleanor and lose any chance of getting the evidence, or go for the evidence and watch another woman die because of his choices. Time slowed to a crawl. Thaddeus saw the 3 hidden riflemen taking aim at Eleanor, saw Hayes reaching for his gun, saw Eleanor's finger tightening on the Derringer's trigger. 20 years of isolation hadn't prepared him for this moment of absolute choice. But 20 years of mountain survival had taught him something else. When faced with impossible odds, change the rules of the game. Thaddeus stepped out of the trees, but instead of moving toward Eleanor or the horses, he did something no one expected. He walked straight toward Hayes, empty hands raised, his voice carrying across the clearing. You want me, Clayton? Here I am. But let's finish what we started 20 years ago, just you and me. Hayes hesitated, his gun half drawn. The hidden riflemen kept their weapons trained on Eleanor, but their attention was divided now. This wasn't the plan. You think I'm stupid, Crane? You think I'll fall for some noble sacrifice? No sacrifice, Thaddeus said, still walking forward. Just the truth. You've been hunting me for 20 years because you know I'm the only one who can prove what really happened to Judge Blackwood. Eleanor isn't the real threat to you. I am. Eleanor's eyes widened. She understood immediately. Thaddeus was gambling everything on a bluff, trying to shift Hayes's focus away from her and onto himself. Hayes's face darkened. You don't know anything. I know you killed Judge Blackwood because he was getting too close to your operation. I know Sarah found evidence linking you to territorial corruption that went all the way to the governor's office. And I know you've been terrified for 20 years that I might remember what she told me before she died. It was a complete lie, but it hit home. Hayes's face went white, then red with fury. Sarah didn't tell you anything. She was dead when I got there. The words hung in the air like a confession. Hayes realized his mistake immediately, but it was too late. Eleanor had heard it. The admission that he'd killed Sarah, spoken in front of witnesses. When you got there, Thaddeus pressed. Got where, Clayton? How did you know where to find her unless you're the one who killed her? Hayes drew his gun fully now, pointing it at Thaddeus's chest. Shut up right now. But Thaddeus kept walking, kept talking. The truth is you never expected me to survive this long. You thought grief would kill me, or that I'd drink myself to death in some frontier town. But here I am, 20 years later, and I remember everything Sarah told me about your operation. I said, shut up, Hayes screamed. That's when Eleanor made her move. With Hayes completely focused on Thaddeus, she raised the Derringer and fired. The small pistol cracked like a whip, and one of the hidden riflemen pitched forward with a cry of pain. The clearing exploded into chaos. The other 2 riflemen swung their weapons toward Eleanor, but Thaddeus was already diving toward Hayes. 20 years of chopping wood and hauling water had kept him strong, and 20 years of anger gave him speed. He tackled Hayes around the waist, driving both of them to the ground. Hayes's gun went flying, skittering across the dirt toward the oak tree. They rolled and fought. 20 years of hatred pouring out in brutal punches and grappling. But Hayes was younger, and he hadn't spent 20 years avoiding human contact. He managed to throw Thaddeus off and scrambled toward his fallen weapon. Eleanor was pinned down behind a fallen log, the 2 remaining riflemen keeping her trapped with steady gunfire. She'd used her only shot, and reload would take precious seconds she didn't have. Hayes's fingers closed around his gun's grip, just as Thaddeus threw himself forward one more time. But the outlaw was ready now, rolling over to bring the weapon to bear. 20 years I've waited for this, Hayes snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. But what happened next would prove that some bonds are stronger than death, and some truths refuse to stay buried forever. The gunshot cracked across the clearing, but it wasn't Hayes who fired. Eleanor had found a rifle dropped by the wounded man and put a bullet through Hayes's shoulder, spinning him away from Thaddeus. The outlaw's gun flew from his grip as he crashed into the base of the oak tree. The 2 remaining riflemen, seeing their leader down, broke from cover and ran for the horses. Eleanor let them go. They weren't the real prize. Thaddeus rolled to his feet, breathing hard. and looked down at Hayes clutching his bleeding shoulder. After 20 years of running, 20 years of guilt and isolation, here was the man who'd destroyed his life, helpless at his feet. "Finish it," Hayes gasped through gritted teeth. "You've got every right." But Thaddeus didn't reach for the fallen gun. Instead, he walked over to Eleanor, who was leaning against a tree, exhausted but unbroken. Her green eyes searched his face. "Why didn't you kill him?" she asked. "Because I'm not him," Thaddeus said simply. "And because you need him alive to testify." Eleanor smiled. "Despite everything. The evidence in my saddle pack. It's not just about Hayes's current operation. It's about everything. Judge Blackwood's murder, Sarah's death, the corruption network. But we need Hayes's confession to tie it all together." Hayes laughed bitterly from where he sat bleeding. "You think I'll confess? You think I'll help you destroy everything I've built?" "You already did," Eleanor said, pulling a small device from her torn dress. "This recorded everything you said about Sarah. About being there when she died. It's enough to hang you, Clayton Hayes." The outlaw's face went white as he realized what had happened. He'd been outmaneuvered by the very people he'd thought he was hunting. Thaddeus looked at the device in wonder. 20 years. 20 years I've carried the guilt of her death thinking I failed her. "You didn't fail anyone," Eleanor said firmly. "Hayes killed your wife because she stumbled onto evidence that could have brought down his entire network. She died protecting the same justice my father died for." As the sun climbed higher in the morning sky, Thaddeus helped Eleanor secure Hayes and tend to his wound. They couldn't let him bleed to death before he stood trial. The wounded rifleman had fled with his companions. But Hayes was the real prize. "What happens now?" Thaddeus asked as they prepared to leave the clearing. "Now we take him to the territorial marshal. My father's evidence, combined with Hayes's confession and what we witnessed today, will be enough to clean out the corruption that's been poisoning this territory for decades." Thaddeus looked back at his mountain, at the path that led to his cabin and 20 years of solitude. "And after that?" Eleanor stepped closer to him, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her green eyes. "After that, you have a choice to make. You can go back to your mountain and spend another 20 years alone, or you can remember that you're still alive, still human, and still capable of caring about people." "I haven't touched another person in 20 years, he said quietly. "I know." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm and real against his palm. "But you saved me today, and in doing that, you saved yourself." As they walked away from the clearing, Hayes stumbling ahead of them with his hands bound, Thaddeus felt something he hadn't experienced in 2 decades. Hope, not just for justice or revenge or closure, but for the possibility of a future that included more than just survival. Eleanor had been right. She wasn't Sarah, and he wasn't the same broken man who'd fled into the mountains 20 years ago. Some prisons are built by others, but some are built by ourselves. And sometimes it takes another person's courage to show us we've been holding the key all along. 6 months later, Clayton Hayes was hanged for murder and corruption. The territorial government was cleaned out and new honest officials took their places. Thaddeus testified at the trial, his first time in a courtroom in 20 years. Eleanor stood beside him as he spoke, her hand steady on his arm. After the trial, Thaddeus had a choice to make. He could return to his mountain cabin, to the safety of solitude. But when Eleanor asked him to help her continue her father's work bringing justice to the territory, he discovered something surprising. 20 years of isolation had taught him to survive alone, but it had also taught him the value of human connection. He built a house in town, close enough to Eleanor's that they could see each other's lights in the evening. Sometimes he still spent days in the mountains, but now he always came back. He'd learned the difference between being alone and being lonely, between solitude and exile. And late at night, when Eleanor would visit and they'd sit by his fireplace talking about the day's work, Thaddeus would remember what it felt like to be fully human again. He'd touch her hand, or she'd lean against his shoulder, and he'd think about how strange it was that salvation could come tied to a tree in a forest clearing, wearing a torn dress and green eyes full of determination. Some stories end with vengeance, others end with justice, but the best ones end with the simple, revolutionary act of 2 people choosing to trust each other, despite everything the world has done to convince them that trust is impossible. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel. Now click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one, with a twist so powerful it'll haunt your thoughts long after it ends.